Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Web Platform Podcast. Today we're talking StackBlitz. We are your hosts today, Justin Ribeiro, Leon Revel, and Danny Blue. Hello, gentlemen.
How's it going?
Hey.
It's going pretty good. All my tests came back with green check marks this morning, so I feel like I'm on top of the world. Until this afternoon when they all go back to red. But we're not talking about Justin's test. Today we're talking about StackBlitz. And before we introduce our amazing guest today, I'm going to throw it over to Leon this week, who's going to talk about This Week in the Web in 2 minutes or less. Leon.
Thank you, Justin. So first of all, the Progressive Web App Roadshow e-commerce edition is coming to London on the 1st of March. This is a free day-long event where attendees will learn about creating progressive web apps with talks and code labs from the Web and Chrome teams. Talks from JSConf Asia have been made available via YouTube recently, and there's a particular talk which stands out from Jake Archibald, where he describes how the JavaScript event loop works with excellent examples and diagrams. AmpConf 2018 is happening right now, so if you're listening to this episode the day it comes out, that's February the 14th, you'll still be able to catch the Day 2 live stream. The first public release of the Elix project is now available. Elix provides a set of high-quality vanilla web components and mixins that adhere to the web component gold standard. A portion of Apple's iOS source code was leaked yesterday, which GitHub have now removed via request from Apple. So if anyone got hold of this source code, attackers could potentially more easily find vulnerabilities. And finally, just a reminder that we're giving away a Google Daydream View headset this month, so if you sign up to our weekly newsletter, you'll be entered into the prize draw, which will be happening at the end of the month. So head over to thewebplatformpodcast.com/subscribe now. And that's everything from me for This Week in Web.
Thank you, Leon. Some interesting stuff this week. Good to see that the web is continuously moving forward and whatnot. And speaking of the web moving forward and the things that you can amazingly build for it with amazing IDEs and things, today we're talking about StackBlitz. And our guest this week is Eric Simmons. Eric, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So for the world out there who doesn't know who you are, possibly, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Oh, boy. Where do I start from? So let's see. I'm a software engineer, and my buddy and I started a company called Thingster.io back 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now. And we teach people full stack web development online. So it's kind of like Netflix. You pay a monthly subscription. You can access all of our tutorials we have on building front end and back end apps. And we actually met down the street from each other. We grew up in Chicago together. So we've been writing software for web software specifically for probably like a decade or so, maybe a little more than that. But yeah, that's primarily what we're known for is our work over at Thingster.
So is that service like Netflix where magically things disappear and then you get phone calls from the studio that why can't I be trained this week?
We innovated on their business model and decided to own the content across the board.
Nice.
By making it ourselves.
I believe that's a smart decision. So in the scope of other things, StackBlitz seems to be quite the conversation piece these days online. For those listeners out there who don't know what StackBlitz is, what is StackBlitz and why should you as a web developer or developer in general care about StackBlitz?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, StackBlitz is essentially like VS Code in your browser, but it comes with all of the other tooling you usually will need for doing development for front end. So it's got hot reloading out of the box. It has a dev server running inside the browser, inside of the service worker. And so you can actually use StackBlitz offline. So it's really an online VS Code IDE that takes full advantage of all the cool stuff that the Chrome and Firefox folks and whatever have you been doing on the service worker side of things. It has full access to NPM. Again, all the stuff that VS Code has, like IntelliSense and Go to definition and all that good stuff. So it's this very tightly knit integrated experience for developing apps that are like Angular, React. We have Vue and Preact and a whole bunch of other things that are going to be coming out within the month, I think, actually. But yeah, it's just a really awesome place to prototype, or if you're learning one of these frameworks for the first time, it's like the best learning environment to learn one of these new front end technologies in, which is actually why we built the thing. It was actually a side project of ours at Thinkster to help our students learn Angular and React without having to actually get a local dev environment set up.
So you mentioned that it's an online. It's pretty much it's Visual Studio Code in your browser. Is it? So how much of that is actually true? Like, is it actually Visual Studio Code that's running in my browser? Yeah. It looks like it, but is it actually Visual Studio Code?
Yeah, well, the name of the game. I guess I'll back up to kind of set the stage of this. So essentially, we like I was saying, we teach people at Thinkster how to write front end and back end apps, and our students would often run into this problem of they would download some CLI locally, like Angular CLI or Create React app, and for whatever reason, it would like break. Like it would run out of FS watchers, or something would just go wrong because it's like Windows. There's just all these problems that will just spring up on local randomly. And then they'll be like, oh, Angular's not working because this error happened, because they don't know. They don't know how to discern between errors with Angular or with Webpack or whatever have you. And so I was, we were watching this happen, and at some point I realized, most of these tools that we're using locally are written in JavaScript, right? Like they're not actually written in C or something. So couldn't we just like copy and paste them into the browser and just have them work there without having to install anything, right? And so it's not as easy as just like copying and pasting, as you can imagine. But we figured out more or less how to do most of the things that you need in a local environment in the browser. And it's just like a lot of work to glue it all together and make it work seamlessly. But my buddy and I are a sucker for a challenge. And so we spent like 6 months building out the core technology that would like make this really possible. And so to coming back to your question, which is, yes, we're using all of the relevant pieces of VS Code that we can, because even though VS Code is written in Electron or written for Electron, there's a lot of things they use that actually tie it very hard to running actually on your local machine. For example, doing the enhanced syntax highlighting that they do, they're actually using a C library that parses like TextMate grammars for that. And you just can't run that C library in the browser. So we had to like roll our own syntax highlighting solution that essentially mimics what that C library is doing, but like in JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever have you. So there's a lot of things like that where we have to, the things we can take, we use, the things that we can't, we have to write our own shims for. But all of the pieces of VS Code that we can use, we do.
That's very cool. Because I wasn't sure. I just wasn't sure by looking at it. I'm like, this looks right, but that doesn't seem like that should be possible. But it is very cool that you guys actually do that. So when, for example, if VS Code puts out an update, do you guys like then go back to see if there's anything that you also have to pull into your own stuff?
Yeah, totally. We have to keep an eye on the stuff that they're pushing, and then we have to, because we basically operate on a fork of what they do, and so we pull that in and we integrate. If there's any breaking changes, we have to resolve those. But we've gotten pretty good so far about figuring out how to operate around what they've done in a way where we don't have too many breaking changes when they add new features and whatnot. But yeah, it's constantly this kind of cat and mouse game for us of taking the new stuff folks are building. And that's not just them. It's like, when Webpack is releasing stuff, because we're running Webpack loaders in the browser. Like if they change their API surfaces or how things work, we have to go in and tweak things a little bit.
Very cool.
So you mentioned obviously you've got the full access to Node modules in the browser, so you can install any Node module that's obviously published to npm. And how does that even work? That sounds crazy to me.
Yeah. So it's I think the important difference is it's like you can install technically any module. Whether or not it'll be able to run properly is if it's designed to run on the web. Like if it's using, again, things that are tightly coupled to your local machine. Like if you're trying to run a binary, that's not going to work just because we can't run that in the browser. Maybe with Wasm a little further down the road, we could maybe figure something out. But yeah, essentially we created this package manager called Turbo, and it's basically it's a full-blown npm client, and it works natively in the browser. and it operates on average about 5 times faster than npm and yarn. And so the way we were able to do this was by essentially having it be really smart about downloading only the files your application needs from each package. So we have like tracing that, at least tracers that will go through your package, the packages you're trying to install, and only pick out the files your application's actually trying to import or use, and then download those. And we do also do a couple other optimizations of running the actual resolution in our data center, and we keep the entire npm data set in memory. So we can resolve any package.json in about 85 milliseconds, which is very fast compared to having to go and ping the registry with like HTTP requests. And so the whole thing all in just makes this like unbelievably fast experience for downloading packages. So you type in a package name and within seconds it's there running like hot reloaded in your application. It's pretty cool.
And so is Turbo like a separate project which is open source and can be used independently of StackBlitz, or is it just something in StackBlitz?
Yeah, that's the idea. It was originally developed specifically for StackBlitz for our needs, and so we've been working with some other folks to go and implement it in various online fiddles or sandboxes or whatever. And so people are starting to adopt it there. But also the NPM folks are now working on like a Bower style package manager that's leveraging a lot of the core stuff that we did with Turbo. So I'm not sure if they've actually like fully announced it yet, but they're basically trying to create a much faster experience for installing like front end packages on NPM, which is essentially like that's really where Turbo shines. It's because it's not going to give you huge speed ups on like node packages, like node specific packages that leverage binaries and things like that. But front end packages are usually very small, and you usually don't need everything that's in these packages anyways. So yeah, we're working with other folks to get it in their platforms or products or whatever. And we're pretty close to open sourcing all the core stuff in it. We've been doing like a whole bunch of refactors on it as we've worked with these other people, but it's just about there.
That's fascinating. Cool.
So we've talked a little bit about the technologies that back it, kind of why you solved the challenge. What makes StackBlitz different from other online IDEs? Because this is by far not the first one. There have been a bunch of different ones for a bunch of different things. What makes StackBlitz different, or makes it stand out from the others?
Yeah, I by the others, you probably mean something like Cloud9 or things like that. You mean?
Yeah,
totally. Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing that the big difference between StackBlitz and Cloud9 or anything kind of in that category is typically with Cloud9, it's like basically this UI that is connected to some VM in the cloud, right? So you're paying for some instance where you type code and it's sending it to that instance and then sending you back the feedback of what happened when you saved your file or whatever have you. The problem is that one is usually the machine you're on is faster than that VM you're paying for, and two, who wants to pay for a VM in the cloud when you have a local machine that's reasonably powerful and can do this stuff, and of course it doesn't work offline because you're connected to, or at least not all of the functionality you would want doesn't work offline because it's relying on an actual VM somewhere to do all of that functionality. So the difference with StackBlitz is that everything that's happening is actually being done in your browser, like all of the compiling, all of the bundling, all of the installation of node packages, the dev servers running entirely within your browser. And so that gives you two things that you usually couldn't get with the other cloud IDEs, which is one, you don't have to pay for a VM because it's leveraging the computational power of your machine that you're on. And two, it works offline. Because again, we're using a service worker inside of our every project gets its own preview domain where you can it's like a dev server URL essentially you can share with your friends or whatever. And if your computer goes offline as you're typing, it'll still do hot reloading. You can refresh that browser pane, and that's not typically something you could get with something like Cloud9 because it had to be connected to the internet to a VM.
Yeah, and you look at the big infrastructure things, sort of like Eclipse Chi, which is sort of it has a Docker container. You run that container. It's got sort of runtimes and projects and sort of this multi-state server environment. I mean, these on the surface, not necessarily difficult to set up necessarily if you're a developer, but also not turnkey by any means of the imagination. When you guys sat down to sort of start designing on StackBlitz, did you have other iterations before sort of VS Code came along? Like, I mean, I'm sure you've looked at the wide span of them over time and said, we can do this. But that must have been quite the endeavor to begin, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. And originally it started off as mostly just kind of like an R&D sort of sprint where we were like, it wasn't even at the editor level. We were at the, okay, can we make Webpack loaders work inside of a browser? Can we get, like a good FS shim that's reliable that will give us a file system, hot reloading, and okay, can we make this work offline, right? Because this isn't going to feel real if people, disconnect and are on the bus or on a plane or something and have slow internet. We wanted to make sure it really felt like a real development environment. And so once we had that stuff actually sorted out, we were like, okay, cool, this is possible, because we weren't sure it was actually going to be possible to do a lot of this stuff. And then we started digging into, okay, well, what's the best experience out there right now as far as code editors go? And we looked at kind of a handful, like there's CodeMirror, which a lot of folks use. There's like a handful of these various editors that are built to run on the web. And this was right when Microsoft was starting to split apart some of their part of VS Code to make it easier to run in browser. And so we ourselves use VS Code. And so we were like, yeah, that's by far the best one, especially if you're working in TypeScript where you can actually get the amazing tooling with the autocomplete and whatever have you. And so that's why we ended up deciding to use VS Code, was largely because we knew it was the best in class experience at the time, and we think it still is. Ultimately, this is a product that we wanted to use ourselves. So we're like, yeah, like we would want VS Code in the browser if we had to choose,
So is StackBlitz, you mentioned prototyping. Is StackBlitz just for prototyping or just for learning? Or is this really could this be for any developer?
Yeah, I think today, the core technology can absolutely work for real use cases. And some people do use it for like real usage. And within the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to be adding a lot of functionality into StackBlitz that'll allow you to use it for like your day-to-day job. Like things like one-click deployments to Google Cloud, full integration with GitHub, being able to do merge conflicts and review PRs and all that, like a very deep integration there. So you can actually have your production workflow being done inside of StackBlitz. But yeah, the core stuff today that we have is totally capable of it. It's right now we're just focusing on getting those sort of integrations built around it so that it's, you don't have to download it locally and then push it to GitHub or deploy. It'll all be within StackBlitz itself.
So right now, when you go and start a new project in StackBlitz, you've got a choice of Angular, React, and Ionic. Is there a future ambition there to just be able to start like a vanilla JavaScript project with nothing in it and just kind of hit it as you would a normal IDE?
Yeah, definitely. We actually do have. It's kind of hidden. We do have starter TypeScript and ES6 projects. We haven't pushed them super hard because of what's probably expected from starting a fresh project, being able to set up your own tooling and configuration and whatnot. And we're working on allowing that to happen, where you can say, okay, this is how I want this to be bundled, or like this is how I want Babel to work in here, and like you're writing that in your Babel RC or whatever. But yeah, we absolutely want to go down that path. I think that the tricky part again is just we have to figure out how to make seamless interop between StackBlitz and your local then. Whereas with things like Angular CLI or Create React App, they give you all of those like configuration defaults are there. And so it's a lot easier for us to essentially do an emulation of their functionality.
Yeah, I suppose if you're going something more generic, then obviously there's a million different options and you're going to have to steer the user in one particular way and they might not quite like that. So I suppose, yeah, some challenges there.
Yeah, that's it, right? Because we'd love to do it. Because when we start projects locally, we often start with a fresh TypeScript project. We have our own kind of boilerplates that we'll use. But yeah, I think within the next 6 to 12 months, I think also on that we'll have some good stuff that should make that like there should be some good seamless interop between web and local. We're hoping, but yeah, it's definitely it's one of the hardest challenges we're going to have to tackle in the near to midterm, I think.
So one thing that I would like to cover as kind of part of the value prop of StackBlitz is you said it's largely for demos and for learning how to do stuff without having to set up an environment. One cool thing is the embedding story, and a lot of other things out there let you do this, but StackBlitz is actually, I believe, going to be used for the official Angular documentation as well as RxJS. Was having something easy to embed and something easy to share part of the original goal, or is it something that just kind of happened?
Yeah, I think it was like it's been like almost a year now since we started, so I'm like trying to trying to rack my brain. There's like some data loss from back there. But I think it was always part of the plan. Because it's really cool to be able to like embed a live VS Code editor on your blog. It's especially if you're using something that's leveraging TypeScript. It's a super great experience to play around with that example code. So we're always shooting for that, and we spent the first market we really wanted to go after with StackBlitz was like the educational one, because again, we started this from thanks to our educational venture, and so we wanted to make sure it was going to be really easy for documentation or tutorial sites or anything of that nature to be able to plug in and have it be embedded, or be able to send folks to a StackBlitz project and let them play around with it and be able to actually like interact with their framework or code without having to download something locally. Because ideally, like if you're trying to play around with something or learn something, we think that the best way to learn it is to actually learn Angular, for example, first, and then once you feel comfortable with that, then go and learn how to use it locally and all the gotchas and traps that might be waiting for you down there. Because then you should be able to discern more easily where any problems are arising from.
Cool. So there are some things that are very, very obvious when you start opening. If you start a new Angular project, for example, you see an Angular CLI JSON file that's there. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but you can actually drag an existing project into the editor, and it should work pretty well. Are there plans as the project matures? Are there plans to add things like the ability to run unit tests and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, definitely. And for Angular specifically, we're going to be getting a lot of the test runner stuff integrated into StackBlitz sooner rather than later, within the next month or two, I think. But yeah, all the sort of stuff that you would expect from your local environment. Within the year, we want to have 95% of that stuff working seamlessly in StackBlitz. And so yeah, tests are a huge one for that. We also have for like the Angular CLI, we also support their generators. I don't know if you guys are familiar with how that works, but it's a really cool feature of their CLI where you just type ng generate new component service, or whatever have you, and it'll actually create a directory for, let's say it's a component. It'll create the directory for this home component you created. It'll add the 3 files for the component, the style, and the template, and then it'll automatically add the import to the closest ng module file. And in StackBlitz, instead of having to open up a console or something like that, you can actually right-click on any folder in the files pane, and we give you the list of available CLI generators to run. And so you just like point at the folder you want, type the name, or click the generator, type the name of the component or whatever, hit enter, and boom, like that component is live running in your application now. So it's this like super, super fast turnaround cycle for prototyping, and just like if you want to scaffold an application, you can you can build a full application, or at least a scaffold of it in like literally 10 seconds. It's pretty cool.
So I actually have a similar question to what I had before about, like, is it actually VS Code running in the browser? So I actually have a very similar question about the CLI. Are you using any actual Angular CLI code in the browser in StackBlitz, or is it just an implementation? Like, I guess if you were to call like the generators like a spec, is it just a different implementation that does the same thing, or is it actually using some of the Angular CLI?
Yeah, no, it's actually using code from the Angular CLI. And so because we have shims around FS that'll allow like normal FS calls to go through, and and a whole bunch of other things of that nature, it's not typically too hard for us to plug and play code, depending on if there's crazy side effects. But for the CLI generators, our buddy who worked on that, I think it took him a couple of hours or something to get that running. It was not too bad actually to plug in. And the CLI team has been working on this idea of schematics. And so the current CLI generators we have are running on the old Blueprint stuff that they're using, which is I think based on the Ember CLI. But the new schematics work that the CLI team has been doing, it actually is designed to essentially stages a diff to a file system, but it actually doesn't apply it. So it allows things like StackBlitz to a lot more easily be able to create generators and like apply the new files or the changed files in whatever way the user wants. So obviously in the Angular CLI they're using fs.write or whatever. But something like StackBlitz or maybe on backend, it can actually be done in like a virtual environment. So that's something that's really cool that they've been working on. And I think they just announced it, but I think it's really cool. I hope a lot of other people adopt schematics because it's a very, very powerful productivity booster.
Yeah, no, schematics are really cool, and I believe the actual schematics utility is not specific to Angular.
Oh no, yeah, no, it's a very vanilla thing that and anyone could pick it up and use it, and they totally should because it's super cool.
So I kind of have another question along the same lines. So you mentioned before that you're looking at bringing in more frameworks and stuff like that. So Vue is a good example. Vue has its own CLI. Does all this stuff become a maintenance nightmare? The more builds, the more frameworks that you start supporting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've been really, we haven't added, like Vue's been one, we actually wanted to launch Vue like 4 months ago. And we're pretty conservative about the work we'll pick up, exactly for what you just said, is that it's whenever we add support for something new, that's a whole nother ecosystem that has different conventions, different defaults, different settings that people are going to be pinging us about saying, hey, this isn't working as expected. And so what we've been really trying to do is trying to get as close to parity with a lot of the local tooling as possible, so that when new changes come down from the Vue CLI or Angular CLI, it's not too difficult for us to just follow along with those updates, and so we're not having to like handcraft these solutions around all of these different CLIs. But that is absolutely a big problem that we have, and it's a big problem around our not just the CLIs, but like we have to manage this kind of custom version of VS Code. So custom editor. We have our own dev server and bundler that we're working on. We have this package manager, and there's just so many things going on for like a 2-man team. We have to pick our battles really carefully, and it makes it hard for us to get these things in a state where we can, and then, like for Turbo, we've been wanting to open source it, the NPM packager. But what's really getting us there has been getting the help of some other people to come in and help us, redo the API surfaces or fix them up or whatever have you. But yeah, it's a lot of work for sure.
Yeah, and so there's you brought up Turbo again. We'll put a link in the show notes. You wrote a Medium post introducing Turbo. Is that still like the best reference point for people to go look at?
Yeah, definitely. It goes into a good amount of detail on exactly how it works and why we built it in the first place. So yeah, that's definitely the best place. And we have links to like our GitHub repo where we're taking issues right now on bugs that people are finding with it, and that's where we're going to be pushing the code for this stuff, hopefully within the next couple of weeks here. But yeah, that would be an excellent place to point folks.
So we will do that. So what do you think has actually been one of the biggest? So talked about some of the technical challenges, and then we've also talked about having to kind of pick your battles because there's not infinite time and infinite resources to work on stuff. How do you gauge community community involvement to help determine what you are going to spend your time and effort working on? So for example, why is, how do you determine, okay, our time is best spent making sure that we can incorporate Vue versus we should spend this time working on unit tests or something else?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and we're still figuring that out. But I think when the volume is turned up a lot, it's pretty obvious when we have to prioritize something. But beyond that, we try and focus on what a majority of our traffic and like a majority of our users are going to be interacting with. And so to date, we've really focused on Angular because that was the first community that really picked this thing up and fully adopted it. And it's in the Angular docs now, and so there's a lot of traffic coming through there. So we try and focus on the audience as a whole. And make sure that everyone's super happy with the current experience and the functionality in it. And we're just now starting to really look into adding, our next set of frameworks. And like Vue support that's been probably the number one thing that's been banging on our door for the past maybe month or two. So we're digging into getting that set up just because the volume's so high on it. But yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky when you have a ton of people throwing a whole bunch of different requests at you because you want to say yes to all of them, but you have to. Or what we found is you have to say no to a lot, and it kind of sucks. But that's the only way that you can stay focused, and especially as a two-man team like this. Like you said, time's not infinite, and so we have to be super careful we don't go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, trying to figure out what to do next, especially, you used to say there's only two of you. That's amazing that you've built such a cool product already. I mean, congratulations for sure. And, it sounds like there's so much great functionality already. And the fact that it's all running in a browser and you can just pick up and go with it is brilliant. Has there been any kind of limitations you've had to put in place because of the environment it's running in? For example, is there a limit on how many modules you can install or any file size limit or anything along those lines?
Nothing that's really unreasonable. I don't think it's actually we were when we first were doing our R&D research on if this was possible. We tried to break it as best as we could. And again, it's like if you have literally thousands and thousands and thousands of files in your application, you're going to see a pretty decent slowdown in StackBlitz at least. But like, for example, we have this project called the Real World project. If you just go to realworld.io, it'll redirect you to the GitHub page. But it's kind of like to-do MVC, but for like a full stack app. So it has the same API surface on all the backends. And so all the front ends and backends are like mix and match. So you can use React with Rails or React with Node, or you can use Angular with Node or Angular with what's some other quirky, there's a Rust backend, like you can mix and match all these things. And it's supposed to represent a fully fledged like real world application. So it's like a clone of medium.com. So it's a social blogging site. And we actually, you can go to, any like the React or the Angular versions of those. And there's a link to run it in StackBlitz. And, there's, probably 100 files or so, I would guess, in the Angular one and I think the React one. So a very like large project, and it runs smooth as butter. It's actually surprising that like a real world application would run so well. But I think it's mostly just a testament to how powerful browsers have become. Like you can actually run a full dev environment for a real app in the browser. So I think there's not any limitations on what you could run in the browser that would prevent you from using this on a day-to-day basis, assuming you're not working on something that's like really like monolithic. But if you're working on something reasonable, which I think typically fits the bill for what most people are, it works actually really well.
Yeah, we'll put the link to that repository, the realworld.io thing in the show notes as well. It'd be great for people to check out. And you mentioned, it's really cool to see how much stuff we can do with a browser nowadays. But on that note, what browsers does StackBlitz currently support? Is it just Chrome at the moment, or is there a wider spectrum?
Yeah, we support just about all of them, actually. The only difference on Chrome and Firefox, basically, if your browser supports Service Worker, the offline stuff will work. If your browser doesn't support Service Worker, the offline stuff won't work. And that's obviously just a very fundamental limitation that we can't polyfill or work around. But other than that, it works basically the same in all browsers.
Cool. That's really good to hear.
So I'm actually kind of curious about the service worker implementation for this. Are the service workers being used predominantly just for offline support, or is there actual work that gets offloaded to other threads as well?
Yeah, so we use a mix of service worker definitely used for offline. Also using it for handling requests for various assets and that sort of thing. So it's acting like a dev server in that sense. And we also use web workers in conjunction with it for compiling or transpiling and the bundling process as well. And so those are split up to be like multi-thread, so that we can a little bit faster and leverage the power of doing compiles at at the same time for Sass or JavaScript or something like that. But like the service worker specifically is largely responsible for acting as the dev server and pointing at the right resources and assets and getting the bundle and bringing that to the browser. Basically like what Webpack dev server would be doing, or Browserify's dev server or something like that.
So in a world where this IDE works as it does now, that you've shimmed out to sort of make work for all these things, and you've got limited time and everything else. I mean, what's the web platform missing? Like, if there was a feature that was there now that, this is such a pain for us to shim, I wish the platform just did this. Like, are there, do you have a running list of that? Like, because I have to believe there must be some things that you're like, life would be simpler. Like, where's my low-level API for this? What kind of things would you like to see in the web platform that would make things like StackBlitz easier to implement?
Yeah, no, it's excellent question. Because we've learned a lot more about what browsers can and can't do than I think we ever wanted to know. But it's I think the one thing, I mean, IndexedDB is a great file store. Like we've used it for storing files and that sort of thing. So it's a great store. I feel like a good API for doing file system in the browser would be a really cool idea. There's like a library called BrowserFS that is actually does a really good job of that. And it brings like the Node style FS APIs into the browser. But I think that I think that a really well supported version of that would go a long ways. I think for something like Chromebooks as well, where if there is a way to have that file system somehow, I don't know, be like synced with your local or something like that, that would be really cool. It's a big ask. I know there was one proposed web file system API a while back, but I think that would be cool. On the other side of things, I think the work that Guy Bedford's done with System.js, because our bundling system is built around System, and so the stuff that he's been doing there is very, very interesting and super cool. And he's been really trying to push browsers to open up more advanced loader capabilities so that we could actually have the browser having a registry of modules and being able to define transpilers and how those modules get resolved. That stuff is super cool. And especially from the angle we're doing as a a development tool where you're building a web app in the browser. But yeah, I think, other than that, I mean, again, I think those were really the two big things that we were worried about when we first kind of went down this path was, okay, how do we have a robust file system in the browser? And how do we get a robust bundling system, dev server that can work offline? And the primitives are there. So I'm not sure if this is even necessarily a browser, a browser level thing, or if it's just this is user library level abstraction over that, because the browsers have most of the things that you need there to be able to do this sort of stuff now.
It is a shame that the file system thing, I think, comes up more these days, since you can do so much, where you're sort of starting to push the edges of what you can do with what we have now. And it's a shame because things like the file system API, on the platform, which Chrome had implemented relatively early on, I want to say, this a lot of years ago now, at least 5. No one else picked up that spec. Now we've got things like the file and directory entries API, which I believe is sort of the next variation of what that API was, that some people support that now. I think Firefox since 49 has some support for that API as well, but others don't. And I feel like the file story is starting to develop more now that we have Service Worker, and people are like, wow, Service Worker lets me store these other files. I really wish I could manage other interesting things, which for things like StackBlitz sounds like it would be a boon. Like, it sounds like that would make your life way easier.
Huge. Yeah, huge. That'd be incredible if that was a thing.
And I was a huge fan of the file system API. I'd built on top of it for a number of clients over the years, back when I could dictate, you will use Chrome internally, because it had that API and you could do absolutely amazing things with it, that I don't think normal people wanted to do in 2013, 2014. But admittedly, things like that, there's so many specs now. It's such I want to say niche sort of thing that not a lot of people necessarily going to use. There's some really cool things you can do with it, though, and sounds like StackBlitz would benefit from that, which is something I think I'll send an email about later today. In terms of what has surprised you with the web platform so far? I mean, as now you've got some things that you want the platform to do, but what API where you're like, this is never going to support this case, but we have to try it, and you're like, wow. Browsers have gotten really good at that lately. Like, was there an API that just stood out to you that you're like, I'm surprised it does this, and I don't have to shim and or fix this?
Yeah, I think it'd be IndexedDB. I mean, IndexedDB and Service Workers. Because we were digging into Service Workers before they. They were online. People were starting to use them, but there wasn't a lot of a lot of public. Maybe not the words momentum, but it wasn't a common case yet. And so it was like, whoa, this is a big deal, being able to get this stuff to work offline without having to do. I think that it's just been a huge feature that's been missing from the web, and the Service Worker API is awesome. Like, it's a very, very well designed piece of software, and paired with IndexedDB, I mean, you can store gigabytes of data in this person's browser. Like, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy that you can do that. And I don't think most people realize that you can. Like, this stuff is pretty much supported across all major browsers now, including Safari. So that was a mind-blowing experience for us. I mean, that was really the impetus of like, wow, okay, this stuff can do all, like, it's very powerful. It can do everything that we were thinking it might not be able to do. This is like, this changes everything almost,
Yeah, IndexedDB has come a long way, because I know that when I had started using IndexedDB for that very thing, storing it for lots and lots of data, IndexedDB used to be really, really slow. Like, the implementation was there in certain browsers, but it wasn't necessarily the tippy top of what performance could be. And it's improved immensely over the years, to the point now where I think people should probably take another second look if they had an initially, poor experience with it. it is quite powerful.
Yeah, I agree. We were actually, when we were first digging into it, I remember hearing that IndexedDB was not as great as it could be, and so but we were like, okay, well it sounds like it'll do what we need it to, so we investigated and we found it was actually amazing. It was actually really good, really fast, supported very large files. So yeah, it's really good. It blew away all of our expectations for sure.
Yeah, it was one reason. It was actually the slowness that IndexedDB, which I think a lot of people remember if you were around back then, is one reason that I remember we switched the file system API, was because we get more speed out of it by doing sort of writing our own little layer on top of it. But now, like I if you need to store data, yes, please look at IndexedDB. It's not slow. It works pretty awesome. You should take a look at it.
Are you using the IndexedDB API directly, or are you using some kind of like abstraction library like PouchDB or anything like that?
Yeah, we're using it directly. We have like a little wrapper, like probably like a 20-line wrapper or something like that around it. But yeah, we're interacting with it directly because we've been mostly using it as like a cache for the bundles and things like that.
So much value as a cache. I'm just going to point that out before you talk, Dave. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I've actually never used it before. But you're talking about Justin. You were mentioning the performance for it actually being pretty good. It's also one of the APIs that's available in service workers as well as on the main UI thread, so you can eke some even more performance out.
Oh, totally. Yeah, you can do some pretty amazing stuff. I think the API has a tendency to scare some people. I know that it scares pretty much everyone here who's never looked at it and go, wait, what do I have to do this for? Why can't I just magically call this and dump it? Why isn't it like local storage? I'm like, well, it's a little bit different than that.
There's a reason why things like PouchDB exist, etc. for sure.
Exactly. No, totally. Right. Same thing with local forge, right? Why Mozilla came up with that, because it basically made a significantly simpler interface into IndexedDB to sort of do those sort of ops. But I feel like that uncertainty about that API has really shrunk as time has gone on, which again, just sort of, ongoing web growth. It's always for the wins.
Yeah, the only downside we found with IndexedDB, which was a major buzzkill, was apparently on Safari. If you try and access IndexedDB in an iframe on a different domain, it'll fail. Which our preview domains are from the editor URL. Your preview domain is on a separate subdomain. So we ran into that. That was the only thing, and that wasn't even IndexedDB. It was like Apple just decided, hey, you can't do that for whatever reason. But I feel like Safari's got like a million of those sorts of quirks.
So we're kind of running up against time here, but I just want to ask one last question before we ask you if there's anything we've missed. So at the moment, StackBlitz, I think it's free to use for everybody at the moment. Is that the plan? What's the plan kind of moving forward? Will it always be free to use? Is there going to be like a pro subscription or something along those lines? Is there anything you can tell us about the ideas there?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like the core experience is going to be free forever. We think. I mean, because the cost to us is negligible, just because all of the hard work is being done on your local machine, and so our server, all it's really doing is just dumping out the last state of your file system and bundle, and then when you hit save, we just slurp that back up and hold on to that, and it's usually in the kilobytes range, storage wise. So it doesn't really cost us anything for millions of people to be using it in its current state. So the core experience you see today will totally be probably free forever. If we add features that actually cost us money to run, we'll probably have to charge something for those. But we aren't really working on anything that should be particularly expensive. So I'll go on a limb and say, yeah, it should. We're trying to keep this thing pretty much entirely free for the foreseeable future.
Cool, that's really good to hear. So as I said, we are running up against time. So is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't asked?
I think the last thing is we're announcing our API and SDK. I think next week or the week after, and it's really cool. Like you can basically spin up StackBlitz projects on demand using this JavaScript API. And it's like the library is like less than a kilobyte, I think. And you just pass along the files you want, you run the function, and then boom, you can open it in a new tab or embed it. But you can essentially have dynamically created StackBlitz projects, and it even allows you to take control of like the StackBlitz VM for modifying the file system and some like advanced stuff like that. But for like the Angular docs and the RxJS docs, that's what they're using to do their examples. Is they're using our API and SDK to spin up fresh projects on demand.
Well, that's very exciting. We're going to have to link some things in the show notes to make sure people see that. I'm sure you'll have a new Medium post out that we can point people to. And, that sounds like a good stop point. The future looks bright. Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything that we particularly missed that, closing thoughts, if you will, that you'd like to share?
No, I think you guys you asked some awesome, thought-provoking questions.
And if people want to find you online, where would they find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter. My handle is EricSimons40, I think. And then our StackBlitz handle is just StackBlitz and StackBlitz.com. So any of those, feel free to follow us, tweet us, use our stuff. We'd love to hear from you if you have any feedback.
Fantastic. Leon, Danny, closing thoughts before we wrap up this wonderful episode?
No, I'm just excited to see some really cool stuff being done in the browser.
Yeah, just thank you, Eric, for coming along and chatting to us. It works really great on a Pixel book, so it's keeping me happy.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for having us. Really appreciate it.
Today, we've talked with Eric Simons about StackBlitz and all the magical things that you can do with an IDE and a web browser, some of the features that maybe you want to use in your next web application. Join us next week when we talk more things web, discuss more things that the platform can do and all the magic it has, and we hope to see you next week.
Bye, everybody.